The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The Senate is expected to vote soon on the House Pass bill, which would prevent the government from collecting and storing phone records, but it would still let government get that data from phone companies with a court order. And Kentucky Republican Senator and, of course, 2016 presidential candidate Rand Paul is opposed to that bill, is opposed to any plan that would continue surveillance of phone records, something he is very much against. And he protested the soon-to-expire Patriot Act in advance of its presumed renewal by filibustering on the Senate floor for 11 hours yesterday. Democratic Senator Ron Wyden also participated. We told you last week that Rand Paul and Ron Wyden were going to be sort of joining forces on this issue. The Associated Press saying that he finished at 11:49 p.m., holding the podium for nearly 11 hours. The AP says that Paul's fellow Kentuckian Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said, hey, listen, the Senate is moving forward with the Patriot Act before the Memorial Day recess. Rand Paul railing against the Patriot Act and government surveillance more generally. Quote from him saying, I don't think we're any safer looking at every American's records. Congress does have until June 1st to renew the law without it lapsing. Rand Paul's filibuster is unlikely to do any more than maybe delaying the passage by a day or two in the Senate. John McCain said ultimately this is going to, whatever news it makes for Rand Paul, this is going to happen. Was there a point to this, Lewis, given that in practice, legislatively, it's not going to do a thing?
Are you asking me if there is a point legislatively, or if there is a point for his campaign?
Well, my point is, given that legislatively it doesn't seem the filibuster will do anything, is there a point to doing the filibuster?
Well, I suppose by doing a filibuster and attracting getting a lot of attention because of it, maybe you are alerting more people as to what's happening here, more voters. Are they going to be able to do anything about it, especially in a few days? No, probably not.
It increases awareness of what's going on. That's a good thing. The delay is not, the delay and the filibuster really just cost taxpayer money, right? I mean, you're just getting nothing done. The Senate is running. All the staff are there. Everybody's there. And you're just delaying the legislative agenda. You're keeping the lights on. You're keeping people working. So in that sense, it's actually a cost to taxpayers. So I'm mixed. I don't know what we've gained from this other than some public awareness about what's going on. And I don't know that that's worth it.
Well, I think at the same time here, you've got Rand Paul possibly doing some political posturing, and Americans don't like the Patriot Act. They don't like being spied on. And here is Rand Paul standing up for 11 hours filibustering. So maybe it's good for him.
Send me your thoughts. Does anything get accomplished? Can we connect anything positive to a filibuster like this, in spite of the fact that legislatively it will do absolutely nothing? Send me your thoughts. We need more companies to get involved in opposition of TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It is just I know that a lot of people call it a trade pact, a trade agreement. I don't call it that. It is really a multinational agreement to give corporations more power and more leeway. And as a result of the fact that so many big multinational corporations support it, it's really important that businesses who don't support it make that known. And that has happened. More than 250 tech companies have signed a letter demanding more transparency from Congress and saying the broad language that is in the parts of TPP that we've even seen, because most of it we haven't even seen, is very concerning because it is so broad. And they partnered with the Electronic Frontier Foundation on a letter which said that TPP's trade secrets provisions could make it a crime for people to reveal corporate wrongdoing through a computer system because of dangerously vague language. So yes, Apple was not involved, Google was not involved, Facebook was not involved, AT&T, but a lot, hundreds of tech companies, Lewis, saying internet freedoms could well be in jeopardy as a result of the broad language in just what we've seen leaked from the potential eventual TPP, and we need to make that known. This is a great thing. I just wish there were more companies and bigger companies saying the exact same thing. Maybe they saw some of the leaked parts of TPP, Lewis, and liked what it would do for them.
That wouldn't surprise me. I would have assumed we'd hear from them. They would have joined in on this if they were opposed to it. I mean, the TPP right now does have the backing of how many gigantic multinational corporations. There's a lot of force, a lot of momentum, and so we need companies with equal power on the other side of this.
Absolutely. And we need to activate around this right away. I've already said contact your lawmakers in the Senate, in the House, at the local level. You can just Google who are my representatives, and there are a ton of websites that will tell you who all of your representatives are with contact information. Write a letter to a different representative every single day. You can do that. Hit up your senator, then your other senator, then your member of the House, then the mayor. I mean, talk to anybody. Send any letter that you can. Get it on the record. The other thing that a lot of people would be able to do but don't think of is write an op-ed for your local newspaper about your concerns with regard to fast track and TPP. You could write about the tech-related concerns. You could write about environmental concerns. You could write about intellectual property concerns. Whatever your big issue is with TPP, push back against the framing that this is liberals versus Obama and Boehner. Create a framework around this by writing an op-ed in your local paper, which is not that tough to get published, by the way. You should be aware of that, which frames this as big corporations against everyday people, because that's really what it should be. And then if you have a business, if you have any kind of business, you can request meetings with representatives of chambers of commerce. Maybe your chamber of commerce is not as conservative as the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, with your local elected officials under the premise of business concerns. There's a lot that people can do here to keep pushing, Lewis.
And this is going to be an interesting battle. We are going to find out if the little guy can win. I think that's how it's going to be fought.
I told you this week about the story broken by Queerty about a married Christian pastor in Michigan, Reverend Matthew Makela of St. John's Lutheran Church and School, who resigned from the church after he was caught, in spite of being an anti-gay pastor, on online dating websites looking for men to have sex with and cuddle with. He said that he was a top. You remember this story, Lewis. And we knew that, generally speaking, he had advocated against gay rights. He had been posting online about how it's sinful and against God to be gay, even though he himself is at minimum bisexual and maybe a gay man. We now have learned from a parishioner at Pastor Makela's church that he told this whistleblower, leaker, call her what you want. This woman came forward and said, Pastor Makela told my gay teen son that he was going to get to hell because he is gay. God says so, and thus he may be better off killing himself. Jennifer Kish says that Makela told her depressed son when he was only 17, if he's going to hell for being gay, then he might as well commit suicide. Kish also said that the pastor became vocal on social media about how he felt her son being gay was wrong, and that as a parent she shouldn't even be supporting him, while at the same time on Grindr, the gay dating website, saying he likes making out naked with men, he likes oral sex and nude massages, that he's a top, and he likes to cuddle with men, Lewis. This is one of the most disgusting characters, arguably, that we've ever discussed on this program with regard to his hypocrisy and double standard and damaging actions on gay rights. There's no place in civilized society for people like this man.
I asked myself, why would he say this? Wouldn't he just kind of be hush-hush about all the gay stuff if he's doing this type of thing behind closed doors? And then I realized, you know what? This is all part of his disguise.
Well, it's a disguise. But it could just be guilt also, right? Where he says, I'm doing this and there's some level of guilt associated with it. So I'm going to sort of try to make up for it by also preaching anti-gay rhetoric. It may be a disguise. It may be just a sort of guilt complex.
I don't know. I don't think someone like this really could feel that guilty. I think it's more about the disguise. I think it's more about I have to make myself seem as anti-gay as possible so no one will ever look into what I'm doing or suspect me.
Don't you also think, Lewis, that it's somewhat hypocritical? Not that I want anybody to kill themselves, but that if he really believes that the right advice for gay people, because they are going to end up in hell anyway, is to kill themselves, although that would just get you to hell faster. I don't even understand the internal logic of it. But if he's giving gay people the advice of killing themselves because they're gay, shouldn't that be advice that he should be giving to himself? Isn't that in some sense also very hypocritical?
I think so. Maybe he's, maybe he's dwelling on that right now. His life did just fall apart. So we'll see what happens.
Just a disgusting, grotesque display of both bigotry and self-destructive behavior in terms of how he has chosen to carry out his life and impacting others. It's just an absolute disaster. This is one despisable, wretched individual. Jeb Bush says a lot of really weird things. Jeb Bush has become increasingly unhinged. He was supposedly this kind of smarter, more moderate of the Bushes. We found out that he funneled $2 billion to George W. Bush's biggest donors while he was governor of Florida. He gave this embarrassingly cringeworthy speech about foreign policy, where it became clear he knew very little about foreign policy. He said the federal minimum wage should be eliminated. He applauded that anti-gay so-called religious freedom bill in Indiana. 4 different answers in 4 days about Iraq. He said poor children need exclusively straight parents to do well in society. He also wants to replace Obamacare with Apple Watches, and most recently claimed that George W. Bush was misled into war, which is just such an utter fabrication. George W. Bush, of course, misleading others to get into that Iraq war. We can now add science to the list of topics that Jeb Bush is not qualified to talk about. This is so bizarre. Yesterday, Jeb Bush said that the Earth's climate is changing, but that the scientific research does not clearly show how much of the change is due to humans and how much is from natural causes. But he went into some sort of climate politics, right-wing apologetics. He was at a House event, a House party in New Hampshire. He took questions from voters and he said, quote, "Look, first of all, the climate is changing. I don't think the science is clear what percentage is man-made and what percentage is natural. It's convoluted. And for the people to say the science is decided on, this is just really arrogant, to be honest with you. It's this intellectual arrogance that now you can't even have a conversation about it." So I don't understand. It's arrogant just to recognize what the science is, Lewis. I mean, science is science, right? They say, based on the evidence we have, here is the most likely hypothesis about what is happening. It's not arrogant to say this is the scientific consensus.
Well, what he's saying is he's saying that it is. He's saying that it's arrogant not to pay attention to that 1% of scientists and a whole bunch of people who are not experts who are saying the opposite. I guess that's arrogant.
When he was saying his little speech, I was thinking of someone going up there and saying, look, first of all, sometimes cars crash, right? I don't think the science is clear what percentage is due to mechanical error, what percentage is due to driver error, and what percentage is due to huge invisible boulders that people are running into, but we can't see or detect with any of our equipment. It's convoluted. And for people to say the science is decided on this, that's just really arrogant, Lewis.
Yeah. Basically, that's what we're talking about here. I don't know. I guess we're arrogant for believing what, over 99% of experts are telling us.
I wish that Jeb Bush would skip being president and go directly to painting in his bathtub like George W. Bush eventually did. Just get to that right away. Skip the trying to be president part.
I don't think that's going to happen. He is, from everything, it's amazing. 2 weeks ago, we actually thought rather highly of him when it comes to the Republicans. In 2 weeks, he has managed to reveal to us that he is the epitome of everything we are against.
Yeah, and it's been a really entertaining 2 weeks, I must say. Send us tweets about this, twitter.com/David Pakman Show. Back after this. Glad you're with us on this Thursday show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Our program is funded directly by our audience through the membership program at davidpakman.com/membership. Today's new member of the day is Eileen Green. Eileen, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. Read about all of the great member benefits at davidpakman.com/membership. We do have this big Indiegogo crowdfunding campaign starting very soon. On tomorrow's program, we are going to be talking about some of the perks that we've lined up for it. This is the campaign to fund the show's move to Boston, to bring Lewis to Boston and bring him on full time, to add another host and expand the investigative journalism component of the show. So many things. And we are going to be telling you more about that fundraiser tomorrow. If you're interested in being an early donor to that fundraiser before we publicly announce it, it's really important to get these campaigns off to a fast start. And early donors are a really great way to do that. Please get in touch and say, hey, David, put me on the early donor list. I have a great film recommendation for you today. It is a documentary, and it is called Client 9, The Rise and Fall of Eliot Spitzer. Most of us are at least somewhat aware of Eliot Spitzer getting involved with escorts here in New York City, a sort of sex scandal that derailed his political career. But this documentary goes into a lot of the backstory, first of all, around Eliot Spitzer's standing in New York as Attorney General, and a lot of the backstory of politicians and escort services. And the most interesting thing about this documentary to me, Lewis, was the sort of brazen delusions of grandeur that a lot of these elected officials have with regard to going to escort services and this sort of feeling that they can't touch me.
Yeah, I think the power gets to them. And time again, we cover stories like this. And I'll have to check this one out because, I do think Spitzer is a really smart guy.
Oh, I think that Eliot Spitzer is one of the elected officials that has had some of the greatest potential to really do great things, and his career essentially derailed by the sex scandal. Some would argue that should not even be part of the public discussion around Eliot Spitzer. Others saying, no, they're the personal of these elected officials at this level is absolutely important and something that we should be paying attention to. Check out the documentary. Let me know your thoughts. It's called Client 9, The Rise and Fall of Eliot Spitzer, and you can see all of our recommendations at davidpakman.com/recommendations. Conservative Bill Koenig told Jan Markell on her program, which is called Understanding the Times with Jan Markell, that the devastating drought in California that we've been talking about at this point for a year or more may have something to do with California's support of same-sex marriage and LGBT rights. I know. You might be saying, wait a second, didn't California reject gay marriage by Proposition 8? And you might be wondering what on earth this lunatic is talking about, but he has an explanation. I'm going to play it for you. Let's cue it up and see if I can
Bill, sometimes we think of judgment as being
times and
Let me cue it to the right point.
It's a very
Take a listen.
at watch.org as well. And Bill, you write in one of your most recent, and the quotes I've been giving, Bill's quotes are heavily out of this newsletter, and you say, right now the state of California has only about 1 year of water supply left in its reservoirs, and our strategic backup supply, groundwater, is rapidly disappearing, and you suggest perhaps that this is even more judgment?
Well, that was a NASA report a couple weeks ago that said that they had that 1 year supply in their reservoirs, and they're already cutting back substantially. The California Governor Brown has required, I think, anywhere from 25 to 32% reduction in home use of water. So, Jan, we've got a state that over and over again will go against the Word of God, that will continually take positions on marriage, on abortion, and on a lot of things that are just completely opposed to the Scriptures. And fortunately, a lot of times when it starts in California, it spreads to the rest of the country.
That's right.
And even spreads to the rest of the world. So there very likely could be a drought component to this judgment.
There you go, Lewis. It's very, very likely that God's judgment against gay marriage is coming in part in the form of California droughts. Now, does that mean that the tornadoes in Oklahoma are divine judgment for that state's opposition to gay rights?
I don't think it's we should be confusing people with that. Let's just focus on California now. Why can't God just strike all the gay people with lightning and why can't God just go like that and kill all the gay people?
Lewis, are you saying that there's some holes in the logic that for hundreds of thousands of years now, as long as modern humans have existed, that God has created and or allowed homosexuality to exist, is against it because it's sinful, and chooses, rather than to just take out the gay people, send very indirect messages, like, for example, a drought in California, a state that, while is in some ways open to LGBT rights, also rejected gay marriage via Proposition 8. This is this is the most nuanced God I've ever heard of.
God truly does work in mysterious ways if we are to believe this nonsense.
I have to admit, in some sense, I admire people like Koenig's absolute devotion to idiocy that he is able to possess. There's sort of like this innocent purity of thought that is a wonder to behold. And I don't admire it in the sense that I think it's logical or smart or positive or anything like that. I admire it in the sense that I believe that ignorance is in some way bliss, and this guy has framed up a worldview that really insulates him from having to ask really hard questions about the world around us. Hey, the drought, yeah, it's God. God's punishing us for the gay stuff.
I think that's what's so appealing about religion to many people, is that you do have the answer to all of life's questions, laid out in front of you very simply.
Texas, supposedly a state that supports the free market, but they have banned Tesla from selling directly to consumers. In the interests of full disclosure, Lewis, after the George Stephanopoulos story, I will disclose that I am a shareholder of Tesla. I believe I own, it's either like 4 or 10 shares. So let me get that out right away. Bad news for Tesla. Texas is not going to allow them to sell directly to consumers after legislation failed to pass the state legislature. Despite some support in both the Republican and Democratic parties, the deadline for the bill passed last week, and it would have allowed Tesla stores in Texas to help customers buy electric cars, something that is stimulative in terms of reducing negative externalities from climate impacts. It is something that would support an American car company, Tesla. Currently, the law does not allow pricing displays or test drives, which is all meant to protect franchise dealers. There's this huge lobbying effort from the dealer lobby to keep Tesla out by saying you are required to go through third-party dealerships in order to sell cars. And not even all the elected officials have the slightest idea what's going on. For example, Democratic State Rep Synfronia Thompson criticized the company, saying, quote, "It would have been wiser if Mr. Tesla had sat down with the car dealers first." Of course, there is no Mr. Tesla. I mean, there is Nikola Tesla, the late inventor after whom the company is named, but the Tesla Motor Company is founded and run by Elon Musk. So you can tell from that comment, Lewis, a very tenuous and limited understanding of what's even going on here and what happened to the free market, right? Tesla Motors is trying to go directly to the consumer, skip the third-party dealer, not add prices by adding a middle person. It's estimated that you're paying an extra $1,200 to $1,500 when you buy a car because you're buying it through a middle person, a dealer. And this is not the free market. This is lobbying groups having the government impose more restrictions on private business. Weren't Republicans against this?
I think when convenient, yes.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. How is it that these lobbying efforts get to you? I mean, if we were sitting in office and they approached us and were trying to make sure that Tesla was banned from selling directly to consumers, I'd be sitting in that chair thinking to myself, F you. Who are you? Or is there money here? Are there campaign donations?
Yeah, the big dealer networks and the car lobbies and the manufacturers. So you have to think, it's not just the dealer networks, but if you're very much involved with American car manufacturers that are selling exclusively through dealers, They are supporting the dealer lobbies, and the dealer lobbies and the dealers may be making campaign donations. It's all this messy circle that leads to the status quo that we have today. And it is actually anti-competitive. It is the opposite of what the right claims to want.
Yeah, I would like to see. It's just interesting how it turned out. I mean, why aren't other companies perhaps trying to follow Tesla's lead here? You know, what's stopping Ford from setting up shop and selling directly to consumers? I think we need to change the whole system.
The entire system does need to be changed, absolutely. And we will certainly talk about this more. Give us a like on Facebook, facebook.com/David Pakman Show. Great interview coming up next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined once again by international relations expert Philippe Assouline. Philippe, we now know that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, has formed a coalition government involving some religious right elements. This is like the slimmest of majorities, 61 out of the 120 member parliament. So let's start at the very beginning. This is not, even with the coalition, certainly no mandate. Do we agree?
Yes. I mean, I personally wasn't very happy with this coalition at all. A lot of Israelis aren't happy. It's the narrowest of margins, as you've said, so it's probably going to be paralyzed. And there are conflicting parts within the coalition. So it's going to be very interesting looking forward. This is one of these moments where democracy, doesn't satisfy a lot of people, and you just have to take it and roll with the punches.
Do you think that from someone who is looking at the situation in Israel as one where the primary goal should be, let's do whatever we can to get closer, maybe not to, but closer to restarting sensible and productive long-term peace talks, is this a coalition in your mind that is going to get us closer, get us further away, or maybe simply because of the paralysis that you suggest will happen, we'll do neither of the two?
Unfortunately, I have to tell you, it's all of them. On the one hand, the negotiations don't entirely depend on Netanyahu or his coalition, right? There's Abbas in the picture, and Abbas has a different set of incentives and interests. Regarding the Palestinians, strictly, this is a coalition that foreshadows a lot of paralysis, a lot of backtracking, a lot of obfuscation, and probably not much progress. Fundamentally, though, the different situation now is that the Arab world is interested in peace with Israel because of the Iran situation. And Netanyahu has seemed to be friendly to that. And so that could be very promising, a kind of bypassing Abbas and going back to almost the 1970s kind of peacemaking with the Arab League in its entirety. And that would be, in my opinion, a wonderful track to pursue. Difficult, but much more stable, and probably one that would garner a lot of Israelis' trust more than Abbas, who has in the past rejected peace offers, made statements praising terrorism, etc. Things that have inflamed the divisions.
Do you see that Abbas might be one of many potential partners on the Palestinian side to have conversations with? Or do you see Abbas as sort of the lone potential influencer on that side that might be part of some productive peace talks? Because I talk to people who say Abbas is the only guy and you're just not going to be able to have productive conversations with any other factions of Palestinians. Or others say Abbas's involvement could catalyze other Palestinian groups to want to talk.
I think that's too restrictive when they say only Abbas. Abbas has proven to be somebody who's somewhat paralyzed. He doesn't control Gaza because Hamas does, and they certainly won't sit down with the Israelis. In the West Bank, he controls, an old elite, but there's a lot of people who resent him for the corruption and for the stagnation. And his own interest might be not to strike a deal, right? That's why he's going for all these ceremonial recognitions, because if he strikes a deal, he might be threatened by Hamas the next day. That said, one of the most encouraging and inspiring things I've seen come out of the Arab Spring is all these Arab dissidents, politicians, activists who are willing to speak up now that they weren't before. And there's a number of voices coming from the Palestinian community who come from there, unlike Abbas, who was in exile for decades. and who are willing to speak a language that the Israelis can understand. They're more concerned with actually what their people need more than symbolic achievements. People like Bassam Aid, a human rights activist who has been critical of the Israelis, but also of the Palestinians. There's more and more of these voices, and I would be thrilled were these people to be given a voice. The Oslo process in 1993 chose to empower Yasser Arafat, who, in point of fact, is not really Palestinian, was not really Palestinian. He had a Palestinian family, but he grew up in Egypt and was appointed by Arab governments. And there was a lot of questions about that. Should we not empower local leaders who actually know the people and know the Israelis? There might be a chance for that now. But with this coalition, is there going to be that kind of vision? I don't know.
Before we get back to a few more specific questions about the coalition I want to address, I'm curious to get your thoughts on, in a hypothetical scenario where Abbas does say, I'm in, I want to have serious discussions here, let's do something. Do you feel, based on the research you've done and everything all the people you've been talking to, that would be received negatively by Hamas in Gaza, because they would say, oh, Abbas is actually not sticking to what we see as the right path forward? Or do you think that they may be swayed in some kind of pragmatic wave to say, okay, maybe we not necessarily sit down and talk, as you said is not likely to happen, but we should reconsider some elements of what our doctrine is?
Reconsidering the doctrine, I don't think so. Hamas exists on this vehement ideological opposition to Zionism and, in fact, to Jews. It's a very anti-Semitic group. However, you can play with the incentives they have. In the past, when the PLO and Fatah have become closer to Israel and Hamas has been sidelined, they've used violence to get back on our TV screens. But they are dependent on money coming in from Qatar, on support from Turkey, on the tunnels from Egypt. There's a way to, pardon the expression, but choke them financially so that they might be more docile. On the other hand, a wounded animal is something that's very dangerous. So it's very hard to tell with Hamas. Even within Hamas, there's different factions. And Gaza happens to be half of the equation here. So it's like you have to walk on eggshells and you have to do a very tricky balancing act. But ideologically, if Hamas accepts the existence of Israel in principle, not as a hudna, not as a temporary thing so they can rearm, if they accept it on principle, like Fatah is said to have done, then they cease to exist as Hamas. And I don't see them being able to do that or even willing to do that.
So let's talk now about the coalition that Benjamin Netanyahu has formed. You talked about how there are a number of elements to it, and of course it's Likud plus 4 other parties. Of the 4 other parties, which elements do you think are the most concerning with regard to their sort of extremist religious positioning within the conversation around peace?
Okay, so within the conversation around peace is one thing, and religious extremism is another. The more hard right in terms of uncompromising vis-a-vis the Palestinians may actually be in Netanyahu's own Likud party. The religious Zionist party of Naftali Bennett, Jewish Home, also has obviously a lot of support from the settlers, but he at least has come up with a plan for autonomy for the Palestinians, which some people in Likud don't even have that. And those two, the right flank of the Likud and that party, are obviously going to be the biggest impediment to an Oslo-type deal, which I have to say there's very little appetite for in Israel now, given the terrorism that ensued. There's a kind of a resignation that peace is a farce that we play. It's a play we put on for the Americans, and the Palestinians feel the same way, because the deep ideological underpinnings on either side don't feel like they've been addressed. There's another set of religious parties which to me are a bigger danger to Israel in the long term, and that's the ultra-Orthodox parties, because they represent a group of a part of the population that is not working, that is not active in the economy, that doesn't serve in the army, and so is growing and developing somewhat aside from the mainstream, and in obviously, like all religious populations, moving towards a more rigid position. And that for me is a threat to Israel's very fabric in the future.
Last thing I want to touch on is, does this particular coalition, in terms of what it represents inherently, have an impact on how it may work with other countries that are part of the discussion? We know, of course, that the United States has a role and has had a role with regard to Israeli-Palestinian relations for a long time. Does the makeup of this current coalition change at all what the relationship is or may be with the United States?
Well, as you've seen, it started off on a bit of a confrontational footing on the one hand. On the other, it's the right wing in Israel that often ends up making peace because it's put on the defensive, because it has the security, gravitas, and authority to make compromises. So it'll be hard to see. The minister in charge of negotiation with the Palestinians was the foreign minister under Ariel Sharon during the disengagement from Gaza. So he has experience. He probably would work well with the Americans. But it remains to be seen. There's a big problem of personality between Obama and Netanyahu. Regarding other countries, there's a lot of right-wing governments that are being elected everywhere in the world. So there might actually be some kind of more fluid discussion there and the possibility of pressuring them. I don't see anything happening in any sphere because of the small size of this coalition.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line, and I'll give you the last word on it, is that on balance, making all the considerations on the one hand, on the other hand, but this, but that, I just am not optimistic that there's going to be any real progress on peace under this current coalition.
Probably not. And again, it's not entirely in their hands. Abbas holds half the cards here, and he seems to be paralyzed by his own political considerations. And he's getting a lot of support for that position from the international community. He's getting recognition of a state that he's not really building. So on the one hand, you have Israel that has a very narrow right-wing coalition. It's going to be paralyzed just by that concern. Netanyahu is very averse to risking power. On the other hand, you have Abbas, who is happy collecting the trappings of a state without really engaging on a deeper level. So I don't think we should expect anything great, with the exception possibly, and I personally hope so, of negotiations with the Arab League itself.
All right. Well, not necessarily the most optimistic outcome from our conversation, but at least realistic, if nothing else. And there's certainly something to be said for that. We've been speaking with international relations expert Philippe Assouline. Philippe, a pleasure as always to have you on.
Thank you, David, for having me.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Fox 13 is reporting that a Texas teenager claims he saw Jesus seconds before he was revived by doctors. This is Zack Clements. He's 17 years old. He collapsed a few days ago while running during gym class at Victory Life Academy in Brownwood, Texas. He was rushed to the hospital. Doctors worked fervently, I think is fair to say, Lewis, to revive him. Clements was reportedly without a heartbeat for 20 minutes, according to CBS Dallas-Fort Worth. He was airlifted eventually to Cook Children's Hospital in Fort Worth, where he would not wake up for several days. It turns out that he says he saw Jesus at some point during that time. Quote, "When I was out those 20 minutes, I saw a man who had long ruffled hair and kind of a thick beard, and it didn't take me long to realize that it was Jesus. His family is convinced it was a miracle." Quote, "I went up to him and he put his hand on my shoulder and he told me everything would be all right and not to worry." The boy's father, Billy Clements, said he knows it's tough to believe, but this is the only thing that makes sense. Quote, "For him to wake up and tell us something he experienced like that, it's just, you can't explain it. It's not humanly possible to explain it." The Christian blogs are loving it, Lewis, blogging and reblogging about this incredible story of a boy who saw Jesus. I was reading the story and I said, wait. You're saying that when in a state of physical distress combined with medication, an image came into this guy's mind that was the exact physical manifestation of what his religion teaches their God is? I'm shocked to hear that, Lewis.
Yeah, the physical description matches all the pictures. It's there are a few stories like this. Not too long ago, there was someone who said they saw Jesus during one of these visions, and that Jesus was black. And we were thinking, oh, well, here's something a little bit different from the normal story about a Jesus vision.
Well, that was the other thing. The people who see Jesus usually see white modern Jesus as portrayed by corporate media, not the Jesus that looks the way all experts think Jesus would have looked like if he were real. So people's miraculous sightings always seem to be based on the modern misunderstanding of Jesus's appearance. That's very, very interesting to me.
It's a vision, created from their own mind, from how they would picture Jesus. And that's how I think we can understand that it's, it wasn't really him seeing Jesus. Now, you'll remember that a few months ago, we covered the story of that child. Almost the same thing happened. The kid said he saw Jesus. There was a whole book written about it.
Yeah.
And months or years later, the kid came out and said, that was all a lie. I made it up. I was just getting attention. That could be the case here.
Hey, we talked about a year ago about this lab-grown meat, and we talked about how expensive it was and that it was really cost prohibitive, but that at some point, lab-grown meat may be much less expensive. Dutch professor Mark Post is that scientist who made the first lab-grown beef burger. He believes so-called cultured meat could be the end of traditional cattle farming within just a few decades. A year and a half ago, there was the first taste of lab-grown beef burger. It passed most taste tests, but it cost about $250,000 for a quarter pounder. So it was not really a threat to real meat because it's so expensive. Now, after further development, Dr. Post estimates it's possible to produce lab beef for $80 a kilo, and that within years it'll be price competitive compared to normal meat. So in 2013, it cost $325,000 to make a lab-grown meat for a larger burger. Now the cost is $11 for a quarter pound lab-grown patty. This is such a drastic decrease in price. I get that this would be a huge job killer. Think about that, Louis. If we get past sort of the ideological questions or concerns people may have about, lab-grown meat, it's cultured from actual animal cells, but it's grown in the lab. If people were to accept that, right, this would be a very, very big job killer. But I wonder if, as we continue to explore the impact of the raising of meat, the the climate impact of raising meat, I wonder if something like this could become a popular alternative.
I am all for it. And, in our utopian society, this would be okay, despite being a huge job killer. But that's another conversation. The carbon footprint here, I'm assuming, would be drastically lower, probably way more efficient, probably way cleaner, healthier. I don't think we would have as many outbreaks and health scares. I mean, this is the way to go, right?
Although there is kind of an ick factor for a lot of people, knowing that their meat was built molecule by molecule in a lab. Some people actually are more weirded out by that than by eating animals. Of course, there's people who don't eat animals because that's what weirds them out. To each their own, of course.
Eventually it's going to get to the point where this has been fine-tuned enough so that you will be able to create a Kobe beef fillet that would be indistinguishable from the real thing. It's going to happen eventually.
Wow. Yeah, and texture seems to be usually the final frontier, so to speak, in alternative meats or meat-like veggie items. And here, seemingly, that is not an issue. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Let's take a listen.
Hey, David, it's Brian from Knoxville. I got into the Sean Hannity call line, and actually they're going to call me back next Tuesday and allow me to ask a question. Now, I have a question in mind, but I would love to hear your opinion, Louis's opinion, and the audience's opinion on what I should ask Sean Hannity when I have this opportunity on Tuesday to speak to him. Thanks for your time, and thanks for the show, David.
Well, listen, I think if you're able to get a question in there that relates to the David Pakman Show, it would be fantastic. We would absolutely play that on our show. I would recommend something like that, Louis. Either see how many times you can bring up the David Pakman Show, ask some kind of funny question, reference something that we said about a Sean Hannity clip. If you can work in the David Pakman Show into your Sean Hannity radio show call, that's my top recommendation.
Agreed. I think that would be the number one thing. However, if you feel uncomfortable doing that, make it about Fox News. Have it be a question about about Fox. Make Fox look bad.
All right, on today's bonus show, a teacher gets fired for calling out a bully. Nintendo hires Bowser as their VP of sales. It's an amazing story. I read this yesterday and thought it was just so funny. And a startled Montana boy shoots and kills his friend. Don't miss the bonus show. All the action on the bonus show and more. davidpakman.com/membership. Sign up. We will talk to you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.